All right, let's continue on with our next video in the series, and this is how to actually use the tools that we are going to be working with to create our compositions for point, line, and plane. If you haven't viewed the setting up your project video, go back and view that now because you're going to need to know what you did. Okay, so continuing with this topic, we've got our project set up, we have our grid turned on, and we're ready to start with executing the actual project. So here we got point, right? And now we have point 1, point 2, and point 3. In point 1, we say, using circles the exact size of your grid, place circles on the grid. I want you to experiment with 2 different grid sizes. So you might do 5 with the larger grid and then make the grid even tighter and then do 5 more, okay? So I'm just gonna do the first few just to kind of, get you going. All right, so fill the grid squares with circles. All right, so we have the snapped grid on. And so the first thing we want to do here is set up our circle setup so that when we draw a circle, it's what we want. All right. First thing we want to do is change our color by double clicking on the fill color. And we just want to go down to like the bottom and click black. Okay. And then we'll just say, okay, bingo. All right. So now when we make a circle, it'll be black. Notice that this is what's known as the stroke or the outline of any shape. And we don't want a stroke, right? So what we'll do is we'll just click on that stroke tool right here, and then we'll just click the none. And that will turn off the stroke so that all we'll have is a black circle when we draw our first circle, okay? We will then go to the circle tool, the ellipse tool, and if you're set on the rectangle tool, which may be the option, again, notice that not every tool, but most tools have a little triangle in the bottom indicating that there are options in that particular tool. In this case here, the rectangle tool, if we click on the lower right corner, we will go to ellipse. All right. So we're going to fill the grid square with circles. Okay, so you just start in one and you just draw. Notice how it immediately snaps, right? Okay, so it's quick and easy to create a whole bunch of circles. All right, so when we're first working with this, again, our goal is to activate the space. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to draw our eye from place to place on the design. And so we might, look at this and say, well, that's kind of cool. Maybe I'll draw one more, maybe close by. It'll give me a little focal point now, right? And so now this is, I could call this my first composition, right? And just to make sure it looks cool, I'm going to turn off my grid, right, which is the command apostrophe tool, and say, okay, it works, We have a little bit of activity here, but we have 2 elements that are close together. They're touching, and there's a bit of a tension point right here, which gives me a focal point. So something kind of the activity draws my eye, the focal point sets it down. The negative space helps these elements to work, okay? Because essentially what happens with negative space is our eye is drawn from the positive to the positive, jumping across the negative. And if we end up either distributing that negative space too evenly or filling it up entirely, we end up stopping the eye from moving, and it stops the composition from becoming active, okay? So I'm cool with this, right? This is a good place to start. I'm gonna go File, and I'm gonna Save As. Now, remember that folder that we set up earlier on, right? That Project 2 folder that was inside of that Map 135 folder, remember that? Okay, if we go back to the, let's see, let's go all the way back to the class folders. Okay, so remember, we're at the root level of one of your hard drives, and inside of Map 135, I created that 135 folder, remember? And inside of that, we've got the Project 2, right? And inside of here, we have our points, our lines, and our planes. So I open up the points folder, and I've already got some points saved in here. So notice I've got Illustrator and other options. For the moment, we're going to just leave this as an AI file, okay? Okay. Now we'll talk a little bit more about converting in the next project. Right now, I don't really care if they're AIs or not, but they tend to get really large in file size, and that might be a little cumbersome later on. For now, we'll be fine with it. So I'm going to just call this point 1, right? Because I'm in my point 1 over here, right? Point 1. And this is my first composition, point 1-1. In this case here, this is an AI file, so I won't overwrite what I had there. And I say, okay. It gives me, what do I want? Defaults are fine. Don't worry about it. Just say, okay, Spanky. All right. First one done. Sweet. So I got to do 5 to 10 of these, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a cool tool. There's an option for cloning. And a clone essentially means, I'm going to turn my grid back on so I see what I'm doing. If I drag and drop, I can just click and drag elements all over town. I would be using this pointer tool, the selection tool, to do that, all right? If you've got another tool selected, it's going to start drawing objects or text boxes or all kinds of stuff. So make sure you've got that little tool selected, and you can move things around, okay? Select it and move it. So that's cool, and we could keep drawing circles like I was just doing before, and that's easy. The tool works really well, but sometimes you might want to just do something really fast. You might want to take an element and you might want to just copy it, okay? This is called cloning. Now notice what I did. I'll undo that for a moment. What I did was, instead of simply dragging it, which moves it, what I'm doing here is I'm clicking and I'm dragging it, but I'm going to hold the Option key down. And notice what happens is that the cursor turns into it has a little shadow on it. That's a hollow tool, indicating that I'm going to draw a clone. Okay, so the sequence of this is important. Notice I'm not holding down my Option key, right? Okay, well, right now I am, right? And so what happens here is that, let me just zoom in on this for a moment. Okay, so notice that when I drag it, notice that cursor changes, right? And so that makes an option. Now, if I let go of the Option key first, notice how that little shadow pops up. If I let go of the Option key first, all I've done is I've just dragged it, right? Which we don't really want to do. We wanted to make a clone. So I'm going to undo that. And now I'm going to click and drag. And the cool thing about it is, as long as the mouse is held down, I can just click the Option key at any time and it will make a clone of that. And then when I'm done with the clone, release the mouse key. If you release the mouse key first, you'll drag a clone. If you drag it with the Option key and release the Option key first, all you've done is dragged it, okay? So important to understand. Click, drag, Option, mouse release, and then you're good to go, okay? So I'm going to zoom back out. Oops, I'm going to zoom back out here for a moment. And now let's take a look at how we can use this in a number of ways, okay? So if I want to select a whole bunch of elements, I can click and I can hold the Shift key down and I can click multiple objects. And then I can hold my Option key down and click and drag, and I can make a whole clone of all of the elements that I've just selected. I can also click and drag a marquee around elements. And then I can click and drag and make clones, okay? Or alternatively, I can just click and drag and then they can all move, right? So you can select one element, or you can select multiple elements. You can clone one element, or you can clone multiple elements. So I'm like, okay, this is the second one. Cool. I'm going to go ahead and just turn off my grid for a moment, see if I like what I like. And I think, these are a little bit too close together or kind of evenly dispersed or whatever. So I'm going to just grab these two and I'm going to just move them, thereby opening up a little bit of negative space. I'm going to turn off my grid. Cool. Works for me. File, save as, and now this is going to be my second one, so point 1 dash, right, 2, got it, all right, hit save, say okay to your options, and bingo, we're good to go. And then you just continue down that road, click and drag an option, and then I don't want it there. How about over here? And then I'll grab these guys here and I'll option drag that group, maybe move them over a little bit more, and maybe move this guy closer to this, and maybe move him over to here and move him up to here. Or it could be a she or an it, or depending on what your pronoun is. It doesn't have to be a guy. It could be your dog. I don't care. Move the puppy over here, okay? And then, cool. That one looks fine to me. And maybe move something off to the edge a little bit. Let's turn our grid back on. Let's see, because it was not snapping to the grid. There we go. Oh, weird. Huh. Strange. Over here, it wasn't snapping. It is now. If it doesn't snap right away, just go ahead and, maybe drag it a little bit away and then snap it back, okay? And then we'll just go ahead and say, well, I'm going to move this little dude down to there. And cool. File, save as. And 0.1-3. And say okay to that. And we're good to go. All right, so I just did 3 in like a heartbeat, right? So this isn't going to take you too long. So that's point 1, filling the grid with circles, okay? Now I can select all by hitting Splat A, right, or Command A, or Control A on a PC. And I'm just going to hit delete with my delete key. Bingo, everybody's going. All right. In point 2, we're going to fill the grid squares with black. Okay, so basically what that means is you are making rectangles and you're going to fill the grid square with black. And the same thing is true now. Okay, so what happens here, don't worry about all these little dots in here. These are all transform little dots, and we'll talk about those later. Don't get confused. Doesn't matter. I'm going to select my selection tool, and I'm now going to start cloning. And you'll notice that, turn off my, see, that looks cool. So now this is point 2, right? So we'll save as, and we'll call this point 2-1, right? And same thing happens here, right? You just continue along with your process. And you'll notice that as we have elements that touch, they start to create shapes, right? So we're starting to get into the planar aspects of design, but we're not going to concern ourselves right now with that. And what we're doing is we're just playing with points. But because the sides touch, as opposed to the circles where only the point of the circle touched, it's a different dynamic altogether, okay? So go File, Save As, point 2-2. Save that. Okay to that. I'm just hitting return just to close those windows up if I'm good with it. And continue on, right? Okay. And in point 3, again, I'll just select all now. Select all and delete everybody. I'm going to turn off my grid now, my snap to grid. So I'm going to go View, turn off snap to grid, because in point 3, this time no grid. Use circles, and you mix circles of different sizes. Limit your circles to 3 different circle sizes per composition. So now it's a matter of simply going into our circle tool, our ellipse tool. And now we don't have a grid, so we can create all kinds of bizarre circles, right? If you want to hold the circle to a perfect circle, hold a Shift key down, and it will constrain the circle, okay? So now we can use circles of different sizes. And the cool thing here is that, notice the circle tool, notice the little helper tool is an L, okay? And notice this tool is a V, okay? So you can use the keyboard commands to toggle between your tools. So now I just want to move things around, so rather than going here and clicking the selection tool, I can just hit V. And now notice my tool has changed. Now if I go to L, notice that I can make circles again, right? Let me delete that. And then if I go to V, I can move it. So I can immediately go from creation to, okay. And it's like, okay, that's cool. We'll go File, Save As. And this is point 3-1, right? 3-1. And you just continue that process. And that's how you finish with the point exercises. Okay, so that's it for this demo.